you need to make sure that you're utilizing the best and the brightest, because the reality is usually going on a shortcut will cost you money.
I think one of the biggest problems in the real estate industry, whether I'm talking to a top producer, $100 million like we've done on many episodes, or a brand new agent, is that honestly, for an industry that has 2 to 4 million people and that's been around for 100 years, our industry kind of sucks. Like sometimes it sucks to be a real estate agent. And so I wanted to bring in a guest today who can really shine a light on kind of some of the big flaws in our industry, but how other industries have fixed it and how he's frankly empowered a lot of agents to come up with the ideas to fix it for themselves. Because I think, in our industry, we have the power to change our own outcome, right? Like we can choose our income by dictating the amount of work we're putting out, but we can also make our lives run and our businesses run a lot easier by simply doing some prep work and some setup. So Briggs Elwell, welcome to the show today.
Matt, thank you for having me.
Well, a little jealous that you're in New York. I know you have better lunch options than I do here in the Midwest, but let's just dive in. So what are some of the reasons that being a realtor sucks in 2025?
So I think it's important to split up two different components of being a realtor. One, the job, and then the designation. The majority of agents in the United States are designated as contractors. And so fundamentally, that means that you are your own boss. You're not a salaried employee. You're not receiving health care or benefits from your employer like you would with a traditional 9 to 5. And I think a common misconception is when somebody shifts into the world of being a real estate agent, way before you even think about selling a property, is not properly setting up your business, because you are now a sole proprietor, or depending on the structure you set up, you are at its core your own boss. And for that means you need to figure out healthcare. For that, you need to figure out what kind of legal structure you're going to have for yourself. Are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a C corp? Depending on where you are, it's not as cut and dry as a one size fits all solution.
It's so interesting that you're saying this, and I want you to keep on that train of thought. But I've probably done more new agent meetings in the last 10 years than half of the industry. I think I've met with 3,500 new agents, and it's so true what you're saying. This is not part of the conversation when they're recruiting to go to all of these many brokerages out there. All these brokerages are willing to hire anyone that fogs a mirror, for lack of a better term, because they are in essence a client for them. These brokerages are willing to take a shot, like, hey, if they make it, we're going to make some money. If they don't make it, it's going to cost us very little. And so all of these harder parts of our industry and all of the ways that this differs from a quote 9 to 5 salary job are kind of glossed over. And so I'm really glad that we're chatting today about some of these things, because I think they do need to be a bigger part of the conversation.
They do. And, one of the biggest challenges is that when you're a brokerage and your agents are designated as contractors, regrettably, you really, there's no blame on the brokerage. They're not supposed to be offering a lot of these services, because if they did, the designation, could be considered an employee. And when that happens, obviously, there's all sorts of ramifications when you're living on a commission structure. And so it's tough, because an agent will show up, they've got their license, they completely skip the first half of being a real estate agent, which is making sure that you are properly insured, making sure you're properly covered legally. And then last, and probably the most important, is that you are set up from a tax standpoint to maximize your deductions and how you're filing your returns. A lot of people, if you go from being a W-2, they're not used to the idea of a quarterly payment or potentially withholding on your commission, because you get this big paycheck and it's so easy to say, all right, I just made $10,000. I get to spend $10,000. The reality is that you are in charge on your own of setting aside the capital from that income to pay your taxes. When you're a W-2, your employer withholds for you. And so you don't have this kind of temptation of money that came into your account that legitimately at the end of the year is going to go right back out for taxes. And so what I've seen is, a lot of agents come into the business the year one, they potentially aren't set up correctly, and by year two, they're so distracted by very simple solutions, and can't get going with the primary goal, which is to sell real estate.
Well,
I'll
and
give.
you're totally right, because the focus of every other episode of this show that we've ever done has been marketing, sales, marketing, sales.
Yep.
But the big thing that we notice, and I'm sure is common in every sales industry, is that you can learn about all the tools, but if you're not taking care of your basic needs, it's really hard to lose the distraction and focus on sales. So that's why I'm curious to know, like, how can agents, like, what are the first, maybe, I mean, you mentioned taxes, you mentioned LLC planning, like, how can they avoid more of that distraction in the beginning so that they can truly focus on income generating, while at the same time knowing how much money they can actually spend on marketing, on growing, without then having a $10,000 tax bill at the end of the year that they don't have any money to pay.
So most fundamental is step one, whatever legal entity that you're going to do or use for your business. It's pretty, common. Obviously, LLC is the go-to. That's not going to fit for everybody, but let's just assume for the conversation that it is. You need to set up an LLC. There are two things that does for you. One, it protects you legally. If you're a contractor, and let's just say, God forbid, somebody slips on a showing, or you potentially say something incorrectly, like the house has 4 bedrooms, but it's actually 3, and then they buy it, they go after you because you said 4. These are common mistakes. They're not intentional. But if you don't have an LLC, your personal assets could actually be up for grabs in a lawsuit in the event of misrepresentation, or potentially an accident.
And I think what's interesting is that so many realtors, when they get into it, or real estate agents, I guess we should change the verbiage we're using. So many real estate agents just assume that's all on the broker, right? My broker has
Yeah.
E&O insurance. My broker has an attorney, I'm sure, because they've been doing this forever. But at the end of the day, like, I mean, it's not that hard to become a broker in this days and age, and that person might not actually have all that much more experience than you. But
Correct.
also, you just didn't ask the right questions.
And, in the event of an LLC, you can get them set up in many regards, depending on where you do it, for $0. But let's just,
$25. I think I paid $25 to go
yeah,
online and file mine in Michigan, for instance.
correct. And it's such a simple thing that, well, now we've talked about protecting yourself. Let's talk about the savings. So you're working so hard out there to make money, but if you don't have a proper legal structure, you're going to file your taxes incorrectly, and you're going to lose money. And on the tax front, I can tell you, we see it time and again, where agents will file their returns as self-employed. So they don't have the ability to go through an LLC or a corporation. They ended up having to pay the IRS self-employment tax, which generally, for every $100,000 in income, can equate to around 10 to 15,000 in taxes potentially. A large portion of that is avoidable if you have a proper entity that is actually receiving the income, and then the income gets paid out back to you. That one it's just so, I get it. People will gloss over when they think about lawsuits and being protected. That's easy. It's never going to happen to me, so let's not worry about it. But the second you point out that you're missing out on tax savings, it's, you're fighting so hard to make the money, you should fight equally as hard to keep it.
Well, especially when most agents, they're making their sole decision on what brokerage they join based on a split that's, let's say,
Yes.
on $5,000 on the low end, $20,000 on the high end. If basing the fact that you're hoping to make, most people go into it hoping to make $100,000 their first year, which is very hard in this day and age, but it's still the goal. I mean, $10,000 to $20,000 in tax savings is a lot more than that brokerage was going to charge you, likely. So that should really be the first, right, I guess, in your plan, the second thing that agents think about after what type of business formation that they're going to do.
Correct. I think no matter what industry you're in, you need to kick it off with, clearly, how am I going to make money? How am I going to protect it? And then how am I going to save it? There's a fourth, which is, how do you make money off your money? That's down the road, obviously, once you hopefully generate a significant cash flow. But it's very short-sighted to kind of have an oversight in regards to tax and legal, because that's an annual recurring expense. It's not like a one and done. And so if you're paying self-employment tax, you're doing it every single year. That 10 to 20,000. Well, it's more like 10 to 15 per hundred, but that adds up. That's money that you could have invested in the stock market. You could have put into a IRA, or a variety of other investment vehicles.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, especially for these new agents, right? Talk to me about existing agents. A lot of the people listening to the show, they're in that dirty middle, right? They're doing anywhere from 5 to 25 transactions. They're not a giant team, but they're not brand new to the industry. Like, what types of things should they be thinking about at that pace in their business? Most of them probably by their third or fourth year got an LLC or an S corp or something like that set up. What are the bigger considerations for what someone might want to think about after a couple of years in the business?
So, to your point, let's assume that they have, a proper legal setup. I'll say this. I had an instance, I had dinner and I was sitting next to an agent that had, the year before, they had done $4.5 million in GCI, right? Very seasoned.
Huge amount of money. Yes.
And that person didn't have an LLC.
Okay.
They were paying self-employment tax. So not to dodge the question, but the point I guess I'm trying to make is we are finding that even the more seasoned agents have completely still overlooked the legal structure component of running their own business. Let's assume you have, and you set it up though. I would point out to you that having a proper financial advisor, because as your income levels change, properly utilizing your entity and all the deductions that come with it will change year to year. Because if you're not consulting with a proper accountant and your income, let's just say, triples, to your point of they're becoming more of a veteran agent, you're not going to be getting the same treatment that you got in year one.
Right.
You need to make sure that you are continuing to work with a professional. And it's all too easy, especially with everything these days on the internet, to cut a corner because you saw that there was a tax filing option for $25. The reality is, when it comes to your legal and your taxes, it's no different than when you hire an inspector for a house or a contractor to put a roof on. You can't go with the cheapest and the fastest. You need to do what is the best. And no matter what tier you're at in the income spectrum from an agent, you need to make sure that you're utilizing the best and the brightest, because the reality is usually going on a shortcut will cost you money.
1,000%. So what would be the recommendation on like the cadence at which a producing real estate agent or self-employed person looks at their financial situation or meets with their person who's an expert? Hopefully, is it like monthly, quarterly? Obviously, one gigantic deal or one really bad month can really change that income, and then obviously will change the decisions and the types of investments that you're making.
I would say, listen, from a tax standpoint, I'm not an accountant, so I can't give accounting advice. But at the end of the day, it's an annual thing.
Okay.
From a legal perspective, it's dependent on your relationship with the attorney you're working with. Obviously, you don't want to just suddenly rack up unnecessary hours of bills. But if you have a monumental shift in your income stream, I had an agent message me this morning who's a very good producer, but all of a sudden just did a $20 million deal. And so that is clearly a fundamental shift for them.
Right.
That's probably a trigger to have a conversation with your legal and your accountant ahead of time. Should I change anything now? Because I just hit a different level.
I like that. What I usually do for those businesses that I run that are LLCs and sole proprietorships, I simply have a recurring thing in my calendar. It's a monthly check-in with myself. I look at all my numbers in my accounts. I look at my revenue. I look at my expenses. And if there's any swing that's more than 10%, I simply send a quick message to my financial advisor, my tax guy, CC'd, and I just let them know. And sometimes they're like, yep, no problem, kind of accounting for this already. Or they'll say, hey, last year in the same month, you had this huge this huge commission come in. This year you didn't. We're going to make some changes on our end, and then we do a in-person meeting once a year, just kind of like you said. But I think
that's
like
a fantastic mindset.
yeah, I think so many, so many realtors out there, they're finally getting good at time blocking and accountability for the sales and marketing side of their business, but this stuff can be worked into your business plan too, which I think brings us to the next piece is that most real estate professionals aren't running like a business. They're running like a guy who has a loose relationship with their broker boss and shows up to work when a client happens to call them. And I think like how can agents further get away from that model, which I think is what people expect and it's become the norm. But it's obviously like that's not the best way to like further our industry. Or your pocketbook.
Correct. Listen, it's when you start in the industry, you're looking at it and you're thinking, I'm going to throw as much out there as I possibly can, and I'm going to see what comes back. But the reality is, it's a game of a little bit of whack-a-mole at the beginning, but it's also learning by mistakes. And if you continue to spend money, for example, on like the same Facebook ad, and it's not getting positive ROI, then you need to discontinue it and try something else. And I do see very common mistake in the agent community, even at the senior level, are people that are basically doing the same thing over and over and over again.
You said in the indie community?
Agent community.
In the agent community, okay.
Yeah. They're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And so you have to run yourself like a business, and you have to have, a financial statement that you're looking at every year so that I spent 20,000 in Facebook ads, and this generated me, hopefully positive 80,000 in commissions. Because you need to be tweaking those things to make sure that you're reinvesting every year in what worked and that you're shifting away from what didn't.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems when it comes to like looking at the marketing and seeing what worked and what didn't is that there's this false positive that yes, you added something new to your business this year, or you did something, and yes, business was good or it increased a little bit, and you're falsely attributing that business to the thing you did. When reality, like you have to dig a little bit deeper, you have to go under the surface and figure out what specifically got me that last referral. Like if most of your business came from Facebook, well, was it one or two posts that did really well, or was it one specific ad campaign, or was it a combination of you just being there and being more present? And I think the biggest joke in our industry is when people say my business all comes from my sphere. No, your business did not come from your sphere. You did a specific action, whether that be a bunch of client parties, whether you made 400 phone calls with a certain topic. You did something that led to a result. And unless you have all of that written down and clearly tracked, it's really hard to track the results correctly. And you're going to end up not knowing how to then reinvest your time, most importantly, and then your money second on what could possibly work for next year.
Completely agree. Your sphere is as big as you can make it, obviously, but if you don't know how to convert it, then it doesn't have value to you. You need to be fluid, because I remember when I was back working at Related, which was a big developer in the city, and we had a very good luxury rental portfolio. And there was a shift going on with StreetEasy and Zillow in regards to how you could spend your listing, capital. It was changing on the cost of the days that you had it up on the platform. And at the end of the day, there was this period where all of a sudden the economics of putting every single property on there were so much better than it was to just say put 3 out of 20 units on them. And where I'm getting with this is that you have to be able to monitor on a daily basis the impacts of what's working and what's not, because that money that's wasted, not only is it wasted capital, but it's money that theoretically, if you had reinvested in what was working, would have potentially doubled your income that year. And I think that is a business acumen that I would say I wish that the brokerage community did get more education on, because it's so pivotal and it's so easy and tempting to try everything. Like I'm going to send out flyers, I'm going to send out Facebook ads, Instagram ads, all of it. This industry is not a one size fits all. Everybody is going to get different reactions from their customers depending on how they engage them. and you are the only one that when you get back to your house or your apartment can sit down and look at what you spent and what created a positive return, and then take the money that worked, and hopefully you should reinvest into that.
Well, I find it interesting. I mean, like, we as real estate professionals have, a vaguely fiduciary responsibility to do what's best for our clients. And what I
Mm-hmm.
find is that, if I'm a customer interviewing realtors, it's really hard to have a realtor look me in the eye when I ask them a question like, "What are you going to do specifically to help me sell this house?" And usually they're going to list a bunch of stuff like, "Oh, I'm going to get it on the MLS, and I'm going to get it on 5,000 portals, and I'm going to do an open house." And it's all like it's real stuff, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of science behind it. So if a customer goes to that agent and follows it up with a question like, "Well, let's say we list it and it doesn't sell immediately, what then?" Other than a
Yeah.
price drop. Like, what then, and what has worked for you specifically in the past? You almost we want to turn this more of into a science than a guessing game. And I think as a customer who's business minded, I want my realtor to treat my transaction like science. I want them to look at past things that they've done that had clear results or failures, and I want to make decisions based on those things. And I want my realtor to be able to explain that to me in a very logical way. And I think that's an area that most people haven't been trained enough to do because they're not looking at this as a business.
I think you're spot on. We've obviously had some pretty impactful things in the industry over the last 20 years, and clearly '08 was one of them. COVID was definitely one of the fastest and most aggressive and reactionary periods. But I do think now, especially with mortgage rates flattening, but up over the last 10 years, agents are more than ever, the ones that are successful are truly financial advisors. And
Right.
you have to watch it because you can't necessarily say you are a financial advisor because you're a licensed salesperson. But you need to know everything. I think the most successful agents out there are the ones that Monday morning they can tell their customer what the current 30-year fixed is and what it was last week. If you can speak to market trends, it gives you the tools to properly, you know, kind of circling back to your comment about how they just throw it up on the MLS and what else are you doing? The reality is that the really good agents are the ones that are going to point out to you what the home is truly worth and how is it going to sell in their respective market.
Yeah.
Because the agent in LA is definitely not going to have the same pulse as the agent in New York because they're similar from a sense of being luxury places, but they all trade differently. And if you don't have the bullet points to speak to the financial back end of the transaction, that's when the customer is like, what else are you doing for me other than putting it on the MLS?
Yeah. And
Because
if when you're talking about the pulse of this stuff, it feels like I had another agent on the podcast say that it's like a tale of two markets because even in different neighborhoods in the same town, different price ranges, different neighborhoods, and different types of
oh
housing
yeah,
stock are behaving completely differently. And so if I'm an agent, I'm thinking, okay, for this client, when we have a listing up that's not selling, I'm calling every other agent who had something that sold, didn't sell, doesn't matter, and I'm finding out exactly what's happening on theirs. What's the buyer activity? What have they done? What was the open house traffic? And we're basically just repeating all that information back to my sellers or back to my buyers with a little bit of my analysis because that's keeping me up on what's actually happening. I want to pivot
yeah.
really quick though. So Briggs, I know you're also on the board of the American Real Estate Association, and there's a lot of confusion over what exactly that is, what its purpose is, what the mission is. Can you just walk us through a little bit of that? Because I think we've had a lot of questions over the last year on that. And I
Sure.
think I would say
So
like a lot of agents seem to be more familiar with it on the East and West Coast, and it seems like the rest of the country is just kind of like holding up a question mark, like, "Who are you? Why are you here?"
I think the East and West Coast component is simple in the sense that the two co-founders, Maurizio Omansky and Jason Haber, Maurizio based on the West Coast, Jason based on the East Coast and South and Florida as well. But when American Real Estate was launched by them end of last year, so it actually hasn't even been around yet for a full 12 months. The core idea was a standalone association for the betterment of the real estate brokerage and agent community. And obviously, there are other associations out there that are more broad, that are going to be inclusive of developers and lenders and contractors outside of brokerage, like construction. And then there are associations out there that are much more direct for specific things like home loans or contractors unions. This association's core purpose is to be a support mechanism for the real estate brokerage community. It's very early goings. I think you're going to hear a lot of great news coming in the coming months in regards to the fact that there's a lot of support from the brokerage community around the goal and the direction of it. But that, at its core is the purpose. I joined the board because I truly buy into the vision of what they've put together. And also because, candidly, my business is really built for the sole purpose of supporting agents and brokerages. So it was a very seamless alignment. But I think that, to your point, a lot has been written about what is, the timing of when the association was launched, and there are a lot of misconceptions. But the core goal is to be a support tool for the agent community.
Okay, so do individual agents sign up, or is this just for brokerages?
Right now, it's agents, directly, and it's in excess of 20,000 members right now.
Awesome.
But we are going to be announcing some pretty significant brokerage level partners in the coming months.
Okay, so if an agent wants more information or wants to get involved, like what do they receive as their main benefit by being a member? Is this like industry updates, conferences? Like, what is the main thing that they get when they join?
So long-term conferences are going to be a very big component of it for purposes of networking. In the early goings, if you go on the website right now, you'll see that being a member for the rest of the year is, I think, only $20.
Great.
It's really
it's not a hard buy.
Correct. The intent is to create a community of being able to actually speak about what issues you might have. And I'll give you an example. In New York, there was a lot of pushback in regards to a new policy, the Fair Act, in reference to agent commissions and how they're paid out in New York City. And when that happened, a lot of the members through American Real Estate Association voiced their concerns through another association, NIRAC, which is also partnered with American Real Estate. And then we mobilized, what we could to voice the concerns in protection for the agent community on that. If there was a member having a similar issue in Oregon, the intent is that we would be able to get behind those concerns, assuming obviously that everything aligns. But the real purpose is to be a voice and a sounding board for the brokerage and agent community, and when feasible, to also support when it matters. If there happens to be a bill or a policy in your local community that the association thinks it can be impactful.
And that makes sense. So really, I'm hearing that this is not like a replacement for NAR, which is kind of like the current thing that comes to people's minds. This is like another option. This is an additional option. It's additional resource. It's an additional national real estate group that can really help advocate for agents and brokerages of all sizes.
Absolutely. Definitely not intended as a NAR replacement. We'd love to actually be supportive of NAR and figure out how we can align together, which I think there absolutely is a future for. Okay. The biggest difference is that this association is just agent specific. NAR is obviously a much bigger scope and an incredible platform. But the intent would be that we can work together.
Okay, very cool. Well, Briggs, tell us more about your company. So if an agent or brokerage wanted to get services and support from RLTYCO, whether that be, how would they go about doing so?
So RLTYCO is currently accessible to agents. You can come to us directly. We've started rolling out a lot of partnerships in-house where you'll see the platform built into the back end of your respective brokerage if we're partnered with them. But they don't have to be broker partners. You can also come to us direct. The general goal of RLTYCO is that we offer tools along your entire financial and benefit journey for being a contractor, basically. we're trying to make it so that you can function more like a W-2 when you actually operate as a 1099. And with that, we assist with tools where we have Realty Capital, which is the platform so you can get access to your pending receivables sooner, whether it's a commission or if you're a developer, we also advance pending equity in a building. Then we assist on tax and legal services so that we can help protect that capital and also save on maximizing your deductions.
Okay.
And then along the way, you get access to a lot of other services. For example, we offer healthcare in all 50 states, over 300 providers. The idea is that, again, a lot of people came into the space offering real estate agent healthcare policies, trying this one-size-fits-all approach. We offer as much as we can in the marketplace. So you could come to us and you would get matched with Blue Cross, Anthem, or private health insurance, which we've been doing lately through a couple providers that are, really beneficial depending on where, what bucket you're going to fit in. And then at the end of it, we're rolling out a new product soon called Realty Blue. Realty Blue is first of its kind benefits platform. Again, you're working at a big employer, 9 to 5, W-2. You're getting all these luxuries, gym discounts, travel, hotels, rewards that you don't get when you're a general contractor as a real estate agent. And so what we've been doing is we've put together a really big, broad scope of partners that have applicable benefits to you as an agent. Think cheaper car insurance because you're a real estate agent. Think discount on flower arrangements for, open houses. And then at the top end, we've got some really exciting ones for travel and airfare. We're very excited about it because just because you're not a 9 to 5 doesn't mean you shouldn't get the same luxuries that a W-2 gets.
I love that.
So we put that together. And then I'll leave you on a teaser. We're very close in regards to a first of kind, wealth management tool for the agent community. The idea that you can get your money faster with us. We can hopefully help you protect and save it. We want to close the gap and, finish the circle so that you can take your capital and hopefully invest it.
That's huge. So if someone wants to get in touch, wants to sign up their brokerage or wants to kind of get started on their own, how would they do that? Who would they talk to?
So if you go directly to our website, you can go on RLTYCO, so RLTYCO.com. You can reach out through our direct contact is info@realtyco.com. If you put in the header, a reference to either the podcast or, my name, you will get, routed to the right party that can assist you with, anything from corporate partnerships or just direct to consumer if you're looking to use one of the products.
That's awesome. Well, Briggs, thank you so much for sharing everything on the show today. I think agents who listened are going to be a lot more empowered to set themselves up more like a business and take the correct steps to both protect themselves so that when they then have some success throughout their sales and marketing efforts, they're equipped to win. So Briggs, thanks for
appreciate the time and look forward to chatting again.